So welcome everyone to Talmud Talks. Talmud Talks is a continuing shiur, that is hour of study, sponsored by the Adult Education Committee of Congregation Kol Ami in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. And my name is Rabbi Louis Aron, and it's my honor to be able to lead people in this study of our rabbinic Talmudic tradition. So I always encourage people to come. Everyone's welcome. All you have to do is just sign in. We're going to do a couple things today. I found a really interesting new book called The Mad Woman in the Attic, and it's a
Oh,
study of midrashim about women characters in the Talmud, and we'll begin with the discussion of the interpretation strategies that the author of that book uses, which should be very familiar to you because they're very much what we've been doing for the last few years, particularly when it comes to the midrashic aspects of the Talmudic text. And then we'll go back to the story of that we were continuing, Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. So I'd like to begin with a blessing because we always have to remind ourselves that the study of Talmud is a spiritual exercise. It is a way to connect with our Jewish tradition, our Jewish past, and with God. So would someone care to begin with a bracha? Judy, that's usually your job,
uh,
chazaka.
I would, I would be honored. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Amen.
And
So
what is the author of the Mad
you'll get
Woman?
you'll get it in a minute when I
Oh,
pull it up. So
gotcha.
uh you may have noticed that I've been growing a beard for the last couple of weeks. It's not that I want to have a beard back, but we are now in a very specific period in the Jewish calendar, and that is Sefirat HaOmer. And it was the period between Pesach and Shavuot that when the temple stood, our ancestors who lived in Eretz Yisrael would bring a daily donation of an omer of grain, thanking God, I believe, for each day of a successful harvest. And since Korban Habayit, since the destruction of the temple, this period, which was one of anxious expectation, has been stressed also as a period of reduced activity and slight mourning. So a number of things usually don't happen during Sefirat HaOmer, and in most communities, at least through the first 2/3 of Sefirat HaOmer, that is until Lag BaOmer, the 33rd day, which include happy celebrations such as weddings. I probably, if I wanted to, could shave tonight because of Yom HaAtzmaut, which is a celebration, but then I have to go through the itchy process through Lag BaOmer, and it's just over that, so I'm not going to do it. So people would often not get married, not get a haircut. Uh, it was what we might call a lentil period, with the idea of Lent coming from the Latin word to go slow.
Oh,
So that's what's going on. So let's go into our Zoom and take a look at these strategies for reading Midrash, and then we'll go into our story.
Rabbi, may I
Yes,
ask a point of information?
sure.
After the spring sessions, we start up in the fall.
No, we'll have something going on during the summer.
We will. Okay, great. Thank you very
Yes,
much.
yeah.
Appreciate
We
that. Mhm.
for usually it's for 5 or 6 weeks. So
Thank you.
here it is, our book, How to Read Rabbinic Narratives. And this is from the introduction to Gila Fine, The Mad Woman in the Rabbi's Attic, Rereading of Women of the Talmud. I've gotten through the first 3 chapters, and I have to say it's a very interesting book. Uh, so far, what can I say? Is she accurate? I think her readings are very interesting. Of the 3 that I've been through, I find them intriguing. I would probably add other aspects to it, but it's really nice. So this is a good book to read. It is actually eminently readable. So it is well researched, but it's accessible to people who are, like you, sort of basically familiar with this material. So it's not going to be a big stretch. So she first starts off with this an idea that she took from the poet writer Adrienne Rich. Revisioning, that is looking at things in a different way. So the idea here is one doesn't have to look at everything the same way, nor does one have to accept prima facie the received reading or the traditional reading. Adrienne Rich is writing this from a feminist perspective. So she is basically saying this is a way of rediscovering, reincorporating, reusing material that we might have thought was not only irrelevant, but maybe even oppressive. So revision, the act of looking back, of seeing with fresh eyes, of entering an old text from a new critical direction. It is for us more than a chapter in cultural history. It is an act of survival. So this is something that I've used before. I have a article in a Festschrift for Len Swidler on the parables in the book of Luke, three parables in the book of Luke, in which I reread them from this revisioning point of view. So this is something that really means a lot. So it's finding other ways of reading a narrative or a poem. Basically, there are other ways to stack the elements. When we read something, we have the choice of which character that we want to place our focus. We have a choice of which event we think is the most significant. And we have a choice of which word or image or symbol is central. Now, we've seen this already in the rabbinic handling of biblical material, that sometimes they have picked out characters that on a first reading of the Bible story, you may not have thought were important. Or they may pick an event which seemed trivial in the biblical text, but has great importance. And you know how they play with words and symbols all the time. So that even though she's presenting this as a modern form of reading, it has great precedent that you've already seen in the material, the rabbinic treatment of biblical texts. So it's not reading in, but not adding elements, but shifting focus. So that we're not necessarily pushing new material in. What we're basically doing is saying, well, I've been looking at this from this side. What happens if I move 90 degrees? Do I get a different view? And a text allows for a multiplicity of readings. So do you remember that how many aspects the Torah has according to the rabbis? Shivim panim, 70 faces. So the idea of having multiple readings is also sort of built into the tradition that we're saying. So this is, in some way, for me, it's a way of getting back to earlier forms of reading. So then she talks about how contemporary readers sometimes relate to the Talmud. And she has 4 different ways. And obviously the last one is going to be the one that she thinks is the really appropriate one. So reading number 1 is a rejectionist point of view. Now, it's not me. We reject the text because it's a different words. The Talmud no longer reflects what we, the reader, believe in. And a Talmud is no longer a source of authority. Now, we no longer accept it as religious authority. It is so alien to us, so it's no longer cultural authority, and it is so distant in time and space that we don't understand right away, what it's trying to say. It's a different world. So when confronted with the other, and here the Talmud would be the other, one idea is, I don't need it, a rejectionist point of view. Too old, too distant, still, very much in the age of the dinosaurs. The next reading she calls accommodation. That is, the text has a very powerful source of authority. And we try to get beyond the difference in time and space by changing ourselves to fit the text. And she says this is an orthodox approach. Orthodox in terms of the Jewish tradition would be relationship with Talmud, but you can see this in Orthodox and within the Christian or Muslim tradition, in which people try to subject themselves to what they think is the reading of the text, be the text Old Testament, New Testament, be the text of the Quran, or be the text Bible and Talmud.
They take it literally? Is that what it's saying? Or
not only take it literally, you take it literally and as authority. So given the choice that you have, that choice becomes the most important. So you change yourself, you pattern your behavior, your understanding, your world to fit the text. The next is she calls subjection. So that is in which, yes, we say the text is important, but we impose our reading on it. So the accommodation is putting primary emphasis on the text or its period and changing ourselves. The section, which he calls subjugation, is that we are imposing ourselves on the text. Trying to think. And we have, lots of people who want to read that they're reading the text as, this is what I believe, so the text has to say that. We take, let's say, this is a controversial issue, but let's just take the issue of homosexuality, acceptance of gay, lesbian people, etc. The accommodationist period would say, well, as I read the text, it's against gays. So I have whatever I believe, whatever I feel, I have to work in that pattern. The subjectionist position is, no, we believe that there should be, this is a reasonable way of doing it. Let's make sure we find texts that support it. Now, these two readings, the accommodation and subjection, are not that different. Do you see that they're similar, but they're both, using the text. The third way, which she says is the best, is negotiation. We enter into dialogue with the text. And when we get to issues of sexuality, which was the example I gave, probably because that's what I've done most of my academic work in, the answer is we're talking in different categories. Our understanding of, let's say, sexuality, or it could be our understanding of economics or understanding of family structures are, we're different for a different world. So what do you do with difference? You can either reject it, you can accommodate yourself to it, you can accommodate the difference to you, you can make them you or you them, or enter into dialogue with the idea that you can learn from each other. And that's where she wants to go. That when we read texts, biblical texts, Talmudic texts, even later texts, we enter into a dialogue and try to listen to the text's voice. And I think through the power of our imagination, or our creative imagination, we try to sense how the authors of the text may hear us. So it's a very creative way of reading. I'm giving you theory, and I usually, so this is, I think, an interesting thing. She then talks about a fun way of looking at it. According to the Pesikta Rav Kahana, as you remember, is a commentary, no, is a collection of sermons attributed to Rabbi Kahana. And in one, he describes 4 different ways of looking at God, or God appears to us. God sometimes has an angry face in the Bible, a moderate face in the Mishnah, figuring out things, trying to do it, how does this work? So God is telling us what to do in the Bible. Ooh, that's strict. Mishnah, how are we going to make this work? Oh, God is sort of, yeah, we can work this out. Gemara is friendly because we're talking to each other all about it, and then laughing that Agada is supposed to be fun. So it's supposed to bring pleasure. And these are all the same God. We just look how it looks a little different as we read, let's say, some of the legal material in the Bible, or some of the words of the prophets, which are, even when they are preaching good social action, do make us feel that we are being judged to Agada. And there are different ways of looking at Agada, that is the narratives that we are studying, over time. So in the rabbinic period, I like this quote from Sifrei. Do you wish to know the creator of the world? Then learn Agada, for through it you will come to know God and cleave to his ways. So I think we've talked about this before, that I've described halacha, that is Jewish legal tradition, as the way to behave as a Jew for the rabbis, but Agadah is a way of forming a mindset, a way of thinking about being a Jewish, thinking about our relationship with each other, with the world, and ultimately with God. So for the rabbinic, according to the author, that this is a theological, a spiritual journey. In the Gaonic period, when after the end of the Talmudic period, the Talmud is established, and we're needing to develop a way of providing unity to a Jewish community that is now spread basically from England to India. They need a way of structuring Jewish life. So lots of the work of the Gaonic period, as a period right after the completion of the Talmud, when we focus on the large academies in the land of Babylon and present-day Iraq, which were sort of central think tanks for the Jewish people, the way is, how do we develop patterns of behavior that all Jews can share and all Jews can recognize? Much as even today, when we are familiar even with Reform services, how a service goes. So if you end up in an Orthodox service, you know what's going on. You know when to stand, you know when to sit, you know what to do, even though there may be slight differences. So Agada becomes not so important. In the medieval period, there are 3 ways that they looked at Agada. Often as allegory, often as parable, and would explain it apologetically. So we often think of the medieval period as when we look back at it from our modern point of view, as a period of myth, legend, and superstition, but much of the intellectual work for Jews, Christians, and Gentile and Muslims is very much rationalism. They're trying to rationalize the tradition, make sense of it. Again, it's a different world than ours. Think about your philosophy classes maybe in college, how so much of the basis is found in medieval European theologians, philosophers. The modern period is we're moving away necessarily from philosophy, and we start looking at the world from different principles: historical, literary, and sociological. So the first part of the modern period, we wanted to figure out what history was. What was the history of these people? And many of these stories, such as the stories that we were talking about, people seem to say they must have a historical kernel. So if we can structure them in such a way, we might be able to figure out the history of the rabbinic period, the history of the rabbis, the personality of the rabbis. In many ways, you could argue that this approach to Talmud for Jews sort of parallels the first church for the search for the historic Jesus in Christian scholars at the 19th and from the middle of the 19th to the middle of the 20th century. You know that there's a history there. As we've talked about now, we say that it's really hard to use this material for historical purposes. And we've talked about that in terms of Bible and also in terms of rabbinic material, because the authors of the material, the people who this material was addressed, and the culture to which it was addressed didn't focus as much on history as we did. History was not an important conceptual idea. So we, in the more contemporary, says, why don't we read it as literature, or read it as a way of understanding the way these people saw their world from an anthropological or sociological point of view. That this material, legal material, and particularly Agadic material, is not giving us a historical sequence, but it tells us, we can get an idea of what bothered them. What did they want to know? What were the stories they want to tell? How did it reflect their world? So it reflects their concerns, what they kept. And she says she likes Agadah because it's you can figure it out quicker, not as complex as halakhic material. And you may remember that's why we went through, as our first entrance into Talmud, we went through a long tractate, but it was the tractate Barachot, because as contemporary Jews in a reform sequence, we understood most of the halakhic issues. If you remember, looking back, there were very few halakhic issues that we haven't thought about because we have to structure services and we go say blessings and we go to shul and all that sort of stuff. It wasn't trying to figure out, let's say, property rights or limits on Shabbat distance or even family law. Those were not things that just come up in our daily life. But prayer did, so we could see the halachic sections. One of the things that I like is that she recognizes that there's a very close relationship between Agadah and Halacha, between the narrative and the law. And I think that's something we've been stressing a lot also. She says the Agadah is an example. How does this work? Well, let me tell you a story. It shows the limits of halacha. Well, it's going to work up to this point, but this is a way of showing that there is a problem, there is an issue, and that Agadah is a built-in critique. So her reading strategies are: read it as a play. There isn't a lot of narrative description in biblical stories or in rabbinic stories. No, we don't get a lot of description of the situation. We get very little information into what a character is feeling. It's very different than, let's say, reading a novel or even a short story today, when there's so much description of both the exterior world and the interior world. Basically, in a rabbinic story, you have dialogue and bits of action. Look for the structure. And she says the structure is almost often in three parts. There's the setup, there's the action, and then there's the resolution. And you have to analyze the players. And one of the things that she suggests is, focus on one of the players and see how you would act it out. Become the actor in the play. how would you say those words? Don't have to add to the words. Just know, how would you say it? How would you present it? What type of emotion is it? Let's say in our discussion, you, Jerry, are going to be Reish Lakish. You will have to present his words to the audience. So you're giving his word through your interpretation. You're adding yourself to it, but you are being him, not you.
I think he's the antagonist, if I recall from last week.
Yeah, he gets antagonistic, but whatever it is, that's again, you
Right.
can do you can do
I'd
it
rather
either.
do that. I'd rather play the antagonist than the protagonist. It's more fun.
Yes, but you can do it
Okay.
even in biblical material. If you're telling, if you're reading a story, I mean, one of the most difficult stories we have, let's say, is the story of the Akedah, the binding of Isaac. And that there's just hundreds of ways to read that without changing a bit of the text. It's just where you focus, where you emphasize, which is very good because it's provided thousands of years of rabbinic sermons. And the Adah says, zooming in and zooming out. So he says, no, look at the context, that any of these stories are also put into a bigger narrative framework. So it's to clarify, illustrate, and subvert. Now, one of the things that I would question in her book is that she doesn't always do that. But that's okay. No one's perfect. And then look into the broader context. And this is something that we like to do here as well. How does the story fit in with the Talmud and Talmudic literature as sort of a corpus of ideas? Not so much an historical sequence, but in a corpus of ideas, and then into the greater historical context. What is the social and political world? And we've talked about that even in something as simple as going to the bathroom. They did it differently. Their toilets were arranged differently. They had different sanitation and different things. So, that's a very easy way of doing it, but just, thinking about that. And the major influences of the cultural systems. So we need to know a little bit about Greco-Roman culture, and we need to know a little bit about Persian culture and the various religious systems that the rabbis are living in. Originally, it would be polytheism as a major thing, but by the end, we have Christianity in Eretz Yisrael and Zoroastrian tradition in the East. And when you read it, that everything is important. There's nothing in the stories, because they are so tight, that is insignificant. If it's there, it's significant. Why is that? Because this is primarily oral literature, and much of it was recorded orally through memory. Not that the people weren't literate, but we've talked about how hard it was to write things down. That was an expensive process. So they were terse, they're compact. There's no insignificant detail in wording category. That they are very present. So we get dialogue, we get action, but we don't get description, we don't get the emotional world. And every story has a goal. And the stories, one of the ways is that, as the rabbi said in the rabbinic period, is to know God and cleave to God's ways. How do we understand it? How do we get beyond just rules and regulations? How does this stuff work? And the other is, looking at terms of, there's a lesson here. It could be a positive lesson, could be a negative lesson, but it's a life lesson. And Gila Fine, she concludes, she likes archetypical criticism as well, and that there are certain literary elements that just exist throughout human history. And they're sort of based into how we are formulated. This sort of has a Jungian sense of archetypical stuff, or the way people talk about reading reading folk tales or fairy tales, that they are expressing in a very specific cultural context certain fundamental built-in human concerns and images. So,
Rabbi
yes.
Shimi has his hand raised.
Oh, Shimi, okay. So, great, thank you.
Boker Tov, how are you?
I am fine, but now it's I have exactly Zaharayim Tov. It's have a good time in the middle of the day.
Yeah, you're right. It is noon. The question: so if your intent is to take the contemporary approach and sort of study it as literature, is that a separate class? Because I feel like if you bring that to a class that is using a more spiritual approach, it could potentially be offensive in one direction and sort of evangelical in the other direction.
Well, I like the contemporary approach because I think it liberates us to hear the spiritual values that are being presented in the text. That it gives us the opportunity then to hear the text and dialogue with it. And through that process of dialogue, I think that is, for me, this is very much for me, that is a spiritual practice. I think it's important as we get on later, let's say we're talking together, if you're experiencing the text in a certain way, you should share that. What it is trying to avoid is saying that there is any one correct reading of this text. That this text opens up possibilities and opens up questions. This is ultimately religious literature. So the people who are writing this stuff want you to know God, experience the divine, and experience the community. So in that way, it is a spiritual goal. It wants you to expand your experience of the world and of the divine. But since we know that, since they are also, this form of reading is saying that there are multiplicity of experiences that can be expressed in the text, that it's not the reader is presenting really no more than one or two or three different aspects. So if I'm telling you what I think the text means, I'm basically saying that this is what it means to me. And if I'm doing a good job as a teacher, what I'm doing is saying, don't necessarily accept what I'm telling you it's about, but hopefully the method that I'm using will help you discover your own meaning. Does that answer your question, Shimi?
It sort of does, no. But I'm still wary of bringing a completely, atheistic literary criticism approach to a class where that would be offensive.
I'm not saying it's atheistic.
Yeah, but my approach might be.
But you could be atheistic. Any story is, you don't have to believe at the beginning anything the story says. It's good to come with a clear mind, if that's what atheist means to you. I wouldn't say you can't come to the text and say that this is nonsense, I don't believe in it, because why read it? When you come to the story, you're going to say, what I believe is that I think there's something valuable here. Let me look and see if I can find it.
Yeah, I don't want to monopolize the class, but I guess if you approach it from this is our mythology, it's not quite this is nonsense, I don't believe in it, but this is the mythology that underpins, our people, and but I don't want that to be offensive. I just I don't know.
Okay, I don't think, for me, that isn't offensive because that's what I believe. My general sense is that the Jewish tradition is not historical but mythic, and myth is another way of presenting and understanding the past than contemporary history. So there's nothing wrong for me to call something a myth. that's like a pretty good thing. It's just an alternative way. And we've inherited this sort of mythic worldview through biblical texts, through rabbinic texts, particularly Midrash, as a way of understanding history in a way that it is more than trying to trace the political and social and economic forces that bring to human development, but to get an understanding of how our history affects us in ways that we can live. That's a whole different discussion. But and Ira, and then I want to get to the text because the text is fun.
Yeah, I'll be really quick about it because sometimes when I attend classes at Kol Ami, it's difficult for me. It's difficult for me because there are people who don't believe what's in these books, and I do.
Okay.
So it's hard. Even the word mythic for me is a little difficult because I remember reading Greek myths as fiction.
Yeah, that's a mistake.
So
They're not fiction.
right. So that's so some things are difficult, but
Yeah.
when you get three people in a room, three blind people in a room with an elephant, they're going to come up with at least three different images of what that elephant is, and that's just it's difficult sometimes to be in dialogue
It
because of
is.
that.
Dialogue is really hard. Okay, so now we're going to show, we'll go back to our text and see how conversations really can get mixed up. So we're going back to the text, and let's see what we are. Can you see it here? It starts with the tragic tale of Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish.
Yes.
We're going to read the beginning part, and again, no, keep in mind that this is someone looking at the story. Now, we know none of us were there when Rabbi Yochanan was taking his bath in the Jordan and he saw Reish Lakish. The only people who know that story are Yochanan and Reish Lakish. So whatever they know about it, they've heard from someone else.
So, Rabbi, we're rereading this at this point,
We're reading it,
or as opposed to summarizing and going to the
the
bottom
next
line.
We're just going to go quickly.
Great.
We're going to go quickly until we get to the issue, just so we can keep back in our mind what's going on. So would someone like to start reading from number 12?
Excellent idea. I will.
Okay.
The Gemara relates, one day Rabbi Yochanan was bathing in the Jordan River. Reish Lakish saw him and jumped into the Jordan, pursuing him. At that time, Reish Lakish was the leader of a band of marauders. Rabbi Yochanan said to Reish Lakish, "Your strength is fit for Torah study." Reish Lakish said to him, "Your beauty is fit for women." Rabbi Yochanan said to him, "If you return to the pursuit of Torah, I will give you my sister in marriage, who is more beautiful than I am." Reish Lakish accepted upon himself to study Torah. Subsequently, Reish Lakish wanted to jump back out of the river to bring back his clothes, but he was unable to return as he had lost his physical strength as soon as he accepted the responsibility to study Torah upon himself. Rabbi Yochanan taught Reish Lakish Bible and taught him Mishnah and turned him into a great man. Eventually, Reish Lakish became one of the outstanding Torah scholars of his generation. One day, the sages of the study hall were engaging in a dispute concerning the following barita with regard to the sword. Barita.
Yes.
With regard to the sword, the knife, the dagger, the spear, a hand sickle, and a harvest sickle. From when are they susceptible to ritual impurity? The Baraita answers, it is from the time of the completion of their manufacture, which is the halacha with regard to metal vessels in general. These sages inquired, and when is the completion of their manufacture? Rabbi Yochanan says it is from when one fires these items in the furnace. Reish Lakish said it is from when one scours them in water after they have been fired in the furnace. Rabbi Yochanan said to Rish Lakish, a bandit knows about his banditry. That is, you are an expert in weaponry because you were a bandit in your youth. Rish Lakish said to Rabbi Yochanan, what benefit did you provide me by bringing me close to the Torah? There among the bandits, they called me leader of the bandits. And here too, they call me leader of the bandits. Rabbi Yochanan said to him, I've provided benefit. Rabbi Yochanan said to him, I provided benefit to you as I brought you close to God under the wings of the divine presence. As a result of the quarrel, Rabbi Yochanan was offended, which in turn affected Rish Lakish, who fell ill. Rabbi Yochanan's sister, who is Rish Lakish's wife, came crying to Rabbi Yochanan, begging that he pray for Rish Lakish's recovery. She said to him, do this for the sake of my children, so that they should have a father. Rabbi Yochanan said to her, the verse, leave your fatherless children, I will rear them. Jeremiah 49:11. That is, I will take care of them.
Then she says,
She said to him, do so for the sake of my widowhood. He said to her, the rest of the verse, and let your widows trust in me.
okay, so we have the situation that Rish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan, they meet. They're attracted to each other. And for some reason, Rish Lakish, Yochanan is a very good-looking man. Rish Lakish is also at least very charismatic. And Rish Lakish becomes involved in the rabbinic circles to such an extent is that he can't go back to his old ways. He marries Rabbi Yochanan's sister, who is even more good-looking. They have children, and Rish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan are in a chavruta. They study together. They come to a point in a discussion, which is a difficult discussion about when does a iron tool complete its manufacturing process. And we have read last week that both of them have knowledge of weapons and tools. Rabbi Yochanan comes from a family of blacksmiths, and Rish Lakish was, involved either as a gladiator or as a bandit or something, someone who was familiar with weapons. So this little discussion is more than something that is theoretical. For both of them, it has to do with, hey, I have practical experience in this. So going back, how do we know that Rabbi Yochanan is from a family of blacksmiths? We've learned that, we saw that in a previous story that we saw earlier, in which being the son of a blacksmith didn't give him as much authority as a sage who was actually practicing that trade. So, and Shimon ben, Rabbi Yochanan says something that's quite offensive to Rish Lakish. Remember, they're disagreeing, so instead of going into a deeper halachic discussion, Rabbi Yochanan makes an ad hominem attack. Oh yeah, because you're you're a thief, you're a bandit. And Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish is saying, like, you still think, after all these years, I'm your friend, I'm your brother-in-law, and you still see me as a thief, as a bandit? What good have you gotten to me? I was a rabbi there, and I'm a rabbi here. What change has really happened to me in your eyes? And then in his arrogance, he says, basically, well, I gave you something more valuable. And Rish Lakish is just devastated, gets sick, and his wife and Rabbi Yochanan's sister comes and says, no, pray for him. You're a great sage. Do something. And he says, you don't need him. I'll take care of you, and I'll take care of the children. And now we're going to go ahead, but Shimi has a question.
So at the beginning of the story, Rish Lakish sort of what language to use, but sort of accepts the mantle of Torah and finds that he can't get out of the river because he's lost his physical strength.
Well, all we know is that he can't cross back. The interpretation given by Rabbi Schneidsaltz, which is often a traditional one, is that he's
Yeah,
lost his strength. But it's quite possible that he can't go back because you can never go home again. He's changed.
right.
He
Well,
still
let's
may
say we
be.
stick with the interpretation that he's lost his strength for a second. I'm really interested. I was just hospitalized for a couple of weeks, and I don't really want to go into what
No.
precipitated that, but I'm really interested in the idea of, I'm a computer scientist, right? My training is in computer science.
Yeah.
I own my house, I own my car, but I'm interested in this idea of accepting an epistemology that renders all of that not, and so you're sort of stripped bare back to some sort of spiritual essence. You're either in an environment where your resources don't matter and now you have to rely on God, or the God idea itself is what did the undermining.
Yeah.
Potentially too much information, but I just thought I'd
No. That's
to
actually
put
a
that out
really
there.
interesting, interesting situation. I mean, I don't, and it is something we have to, that I think is addressed better in other situations in which what we had no longer suffices for the needs we need now, whether it's an epistemological change, whether it's a sociological change, whether it's change in health and status. That's something that people have to deal with all the time. That's one of the biggest pastoral challenges that I know that I personally and also professionally have faced. How do we deal with these radical changes, whether they're spiritual or intellectual, uh, and do it? What I think here is not so much that when he changed his way from being sort of a bandit, which is not necessarily a negative, remember, in this world, because a bandit is also would be an insurgent, someone who's revolting against Roman authority, someone who's protecting the poor. Don't always think he's a highwayman. This is not necessarily a negative. It may be another form of resistance. But once he gets involved in his new life and he is so invested as a sage, as a chaver of the rabbinic circle, and has gained status in that, there's no going home again. He's changed so radically. So he still may be able to do his 100 push-ups, but he can't be a leader of rebels or insurgents or bandits.
Yeah, but if you follow through the story through line according to the original the
Yeah.
interpretation laid out, it makes him sick and kills him, right? Isn't
And
that the
that's what
conclusion?
basically when he's and when his brother-in-law and friend says, you're really not what you think you are. You're still a bandit.
Yeah.
That's devastating. That's how I'm reading it. I think the challenge that you offer is a really good one. And the thing here that I see here, and you can disagree with me, guys, is that even when Rabbi Yochanan sees what he's done, he doesn't step back. He doubles down. He doesn't say, "Oh, I'm sorry. No, you're still a friend of mine. You're still my brother-in-law." He says, doesn't go pray for him, doesn't do a Bikur Cholim visit or something like that. And when his sister comes and says, you really ought to do something about this, he's basically saying, I don't need him. I'll be the kid's father. I'll take care of you. You don't have to worry. Your material needs will be taken care of. So he disses his friend and he disses his sister. No. Cindy, you have your hand up.
Yes, I see this a little bit differently.
Good.
I I'm listening to everything that you guys are saying, and I just think it's a little bit deeper. It's more of, to me, a spiritual crisis where I I see in this reading there is a deeper relationship between these two men that mirrors the way somebody would talk with a lover. And I see that when you have a very deep connection with someone, more than just your brother in law, more than just your mentor, more than just your spiritual teacher, and someone says something so hurtful that you can't get past that, I can see where there's a breakdown, not just in your body, in your mind, but in your soul. And I just see this as something that happens in our world today, where people are just not willing to reconcile their differences. And I just see this as a lover's quarrel gone completely wrong. That's just how I'm looking at it.
I think I think you're hitting the nail on the head, actually, Cindy. I'm glad you brought it up because I think that is part of it. These men are really, really close. They love each other. And this is really close bonding. And yeah, Rabbi Yochanan did
But
something
there's a lot that
terrible.
I don't think we understand about Yochanan at this point, because the dialogue is over metallurgy, let's say. I
It
mean,
is
I think
over.
that's where we really would need to dig into. What is the significance of this dialogue that makes the issue so deep and heart felt, and then heart wrenching? So I think that's where I'm sure the rabbis have been debating for
Yeah.
many centuries what the significance is of when a tool is ready.
Yes, so that's it. No, the difference here is that both of them, their heritage, who they are, has to deal with these issues. So this isn't me
Mm-hmm.
or you talking about something that's theoretical or about an idea out there. This idea about the question has to do with their identity and their personal history and their family history. So the issue is very, very personal. Remember, Rabbi
Mm-hmm.
Yochanan
Yeah,
comes from a
yeah.
family of blacksmiths. His status is, part of it is being a sage, but part of it
Mm.
is his family heritage. And Reish Lakish, even though he's no longer involved in that, that's something that was, he knew about this stuff.
So
He
it
had,
sounds like it's pretextual, really, because there, as Cindy said, there's much more deeper emotional issues here,
yeah, it's emotional.
and that's really why that's the conflict here.
Yeah, it's
And
an emotion.
why would Yochanan be just so stubborn and so and so fraught? It's just stubborn. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think what Cindy says that these people are in a very close lovers relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Yochanan, Cindy, I hope I'm not misrepresenting you, says something that is just terrible, utterly devastating. So let's say 16. Would someone like to read?
I can read.
Okay, please.
Ultimately, Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, Reish Lakish, died. Rabbi Yochanan was sorely pained over losing him. The rabbi said, "Who will go to calm Rabbi Yochanan's mind and comfort him over his loss?" They said, "Let Rabbi Elazar ben Pedat go as his statements are sharp. That is, he is clever and will be able to serve as a substitute for Reish Lachish. Rabbi Elazar ben Padat went and sat before Rabbi Yochanan. With regard to every matter that Rabbi Yochanan would say, Rabbi Elazar ben Padat would say to him, there is a ruling which is taught in a Baraita that supports your opinion. Rabbi Yochanan said to him, are you comparable to the son of Lachish? In my discussions with the son of Lachish, when I would state a matter, he would raise 24 difficulties against me in an attempt to disprove my claim. And I would answer him with 24 questions, and the halacha by itself would become broadened and clarified. And yet you say to me, there is a ruling which is taught in a Paraita that supports your opinion. Do I not know that what I say is good? Being reputed by Reish Lakish served a purpose. Your bringing proof to my statements does not.
Last one.
Rabbi Yochanan went around, rending his clothing, weeping and saying, where are you, son of Lakish? Where are you, son of Lakish? Rabbi Yochanan screamed until his mind was taken from him. That is, he went insane. The rabbis prayed and requested for God to have mercy on him and take his soul, and Rabbi Yochanan died.
Wow.
Wow.
There's a lot in this. So,
He didn't want a yes man. He wanted
he wanted more. He wanted no. Remember, he was in a relationship. Yeah. This relationship was a deep relationship. The first thing we want to notice in the text is this word here. Na nafshe de Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish. This is the first time in this story that we have Reish Lakish given the title Rabbi. Rabbi. Until this point, it was always Reish Lakish. From this point on in the story, it's Reish Lakish. It's no longer Reish Lakish. It's Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish or just ben Lakish. So, in some way, just changing that, I believe that the author of this text is already criticizing, saying something in response to Rabbi Yochanan. You said he was the last time we heard the rabbi for Reish Lakish was I was a rabbi for the bandits, and now I'm a rabbi here. What's the difference? So here the text is saying Reish Lakish, Shimon ben Lakish, is a rabbi, and we have his full name. So the text is telling us something. We have to figure that out, but it is telling us something. And then
sometimes when people die, they're respected more than when they were alive.
It could be, yeah. It could be. My sense here is it's a criticism. It is, it's telling us at the beginning of this last part of the story that Rabbi Yochanan was really wrong. He dies, and what happens? How does Rabbi Yochanan respond to this death?
He can't be comforted.
Crazy.
He's devastated. Cindy, what would you say? Mark, you have your hand up. I'm sorry.
Yeah, he goes insane. So 2 great scholars are lost because of this one disagreement.
Yeah, they are both broken.
Mm-hmm.
I think maybe Lakish becomes a rabbi even in Yochanan's mind post death, so severely pained over him that it's sort of like, he's elevated. Yeah, even Yochanan elevates him.
Yeah,
well, they're equals at this point. They're equals.
Yeah. Now we learned that they are more than equals. Rabbi Elazar ben Padat is a great scholar, but He doesn't have the sharpness.
I just think it's a cautionary tale again that
Mm.
when you have a disagreement with somebody over something so silly as pride, that the consequences are real, and you had two really learned men who fell apart afterwards. And yes, they were both rabbis, but they had too much pride, and it destroyed so much in this story.
So the part of this you're reading as a cautionary tale against arrogance.
Yes.
And sort of being concerned, focusing on oneself.
But then Lachish was devastated over the words of
Yeah,
Yochanan. So
yeah,
it's not it's a whole different reaction. It's not really pride. Maybe it has something to do with maybe controlling your emotions over the truth. In other words, like control, yeah, because Lachish did not have to become so devastated. There were other ways he may have been able to deal with this.
yeah.
But
It's like
Uh,
it's a two-way street. It's a
I
two-way
mean, he
street,
was hurt. I mean, you can't
right?
control that. I mean, it's maybe he shouldn't have been hurt, but yeah, but he was
and
hurt.
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah.
Also, Yochanan really gave. I think it's a really low blow. He got right
yes,
to. He
Right.
attacked Shimon ben Lachish's vulnerability.
right,
He knew exactly where to strike, and as Cindy said, this is something that only a person who is really intimate knows where to hurt another.
Right.
You know how to hurt a person you love really well.
right, right.
And Rabbi Yochanan did that. He punched low.
Yeah,
Okay, so
It's
the last,
kind of like, I made you and I can break you down kind of mentality that I believe could have been so devastating, that I love you and you're breaking me down so much and telling me that I'm only a rabbi because you allowed it. And I think it goes deeper, and that's just kind of where I'm coming from.
honey, Cindy, I think you're there. I mean, I think this is a really deep story about interpersonal relationship with people who were very, very emotionally tied to each other.
Yeah, and Rabbi
And
Yochanan was devastated too by what happened, by what he
yeah,
did.
what he did devastated him. Now, the last part is 18, and we're just going to spend 2 minutes on this. He went around rending his clothes. So he's in mourning and weeping. He can't get really out of this. And he's going, Hecha at Bar Lachish, Hecha at Bar Lachish. And he's never called him Bar Lachish or Shimon before. So, we're hearing he's now no longer Reish Lachish or no longer, not even rabbi. It's just, where are you, my dear friend? Where are you? And he screams until his mind was taken away from him. Ad desaf date mine. Ah, yeah. So what's happening? Ba'u Rabbanan. So the rabbis are praying. And what do they want God to do? To have mercy on him. And he dies. What are they praying for?
For his death,
Yeah.
because he's in such a devastated condition.
Yeah. So that would enter into a whole new discussion in which we really don't have time to do
yeah.
today. But no, that in terms of, is it appropriate at a certain point that the prayer for healing is a prayer for a person to leave this world?
And it's so ironic because he promised his sister that he would take care of her.
Yeah,
And,
Children.
that wasn't even important at this point.
that's right.
Rabbi, I'm wondering if everybody was praying for his death or if somebody was going to break a clay pot.
That's a different story, but That's the story of Rabbi. Yeah, and his death. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But here I don't think so. I think this is they're praying for mercy, and the mercy is that he died. It isn't so much they're praying for his life and that Rabbi's housekeeper prayed otherwise and broke their prayer. The prayers aren't keeping him alive. That's how I'm reading that. But I'm so glad you brought that in again, Cindy. That's really another
And then
way.
I'll throw in the hey, life after death. He may be reunited with Lachish.
Of
But
course, they're reunited. They're in the Yeshiva Shalmala studying Torah together, but they're not here.
Right.
Yeah. That's always no. Whatever you believe about life after death, the reality is the person you love is not here. True. And whether you're going to meet sometime in the future, you're still not here. When your friend moves to California, before we had the internet, they're not here. And according to the rabbis we read in Barachot, that you can say the blessing, Mechaye Meitim, the one who restores the death, if you haven't seen a friend for, I think it was a year. And after a year, they come back. It's like you're alive again. So being alive is not only physically being alive, but it's also being present in these people's minds. Wow. So this is pretty good stuff. Next week, we're going to be learning a little bit more about Chavruta study. So I just want to put in a note here so I can remember where we are. So let me save that. Let me get out. And I want to thank everyone for really being here today. This is one of the big stories in the rabbinic tradition. And I hope that you can see, how, really so much depth there is to this and how we've just, in many ways, touched the surface. It's a rather short story, but it really gets to, in my feeling, some really important issues about human relationships. Hopefully, only your relationships are running perfectly and everything is fine, and you only have lots of love, joy, and respect for each other. And this whole next week goes very, very well. I want to wish everyone the best. And this is a special period. It's Yom HaZikaron followed by Yom HaAtzmaut. Yesterday at the JCC, there was an exceedingly moving Yom HaZikaron Israeli Memorial Day commemoration, primarily for the Israelis living in the United States and our community. I had the opportunity of going, and it was really very, very moving and touching. And there's going to be celebrations tonight as well. The next big Jewish holiday is Lag BaOmer, followed by Shavuot. So we are on the 19th day of the Omer. The Omer is 49 days, so do the math. Take good care, and sei gesund, and hopefully we'll all be here next week and learn about Chavruta. And bring a friend. You get extra credit if you bring a friend.